YouTube stream to kick
Yay.
in here. Yeah, our first live here, new platform, new streaming, and waiting for confirmation on this YouTube side. Oh yeah. Okay. We're here. Alex Iglesias, CTO of Finsweet. I'm Joe Krug, CEO of Finsweet, and we are talking about code versus no code today. We're going to be talking about when you may want to use one of them, when you may want to use the other, and why no code or code is a right decision for a certain project. We're going to be looking at this graph here. A lot of the conversation is going to revolve around this graph, this effort to complexity. Really interesting graph. We're going to show you where we got this from, and this will be a really nice conversation topic. But before we get too far into this, let's do a formal intro to Alex. I'm joined here by our CTO of Finsweet. If you've used attributes, cookie consent, Finsweet extension, you have interacted with Alex's code. He's the creator of all of these products and many more to come. Alex, nice to have you
Hey,
here live.
thanks.
Yeah, it's exciting. And Alex has really motivated me to be more technical, to be able to do a stream like this where we get a little bit more technical, start to talk about things that a lot of other no coders aren't talking about, right? This concept of no code is very no codey, where we're not usually thinking code first, but sometimes there are projects where you do need to think code first for scalability, for size, for all of these different reasons. So that's what we're talking about today. Before we get too far into it, though, let's say hello to everybody here in the chat. We have Victoria. Hello. We have John. What's up, John? Cristiano. How you doing? Gabe. Marta. We have Michael Collins. How are you? Tonette. Magdalena. Tom Volts. Lucas. Tom. Daniel. Penny. Frank. Everyone's here today. Great. Rock and Roll CEO.
Hey.
Zach. How's it going? Cool. Okay. Alex, what are you thinking about? What's on your mind for this talk today? What do you want to teach people?
Well, my first thought is that I think that the most interesting part for everyone here is that probably they're thinking, oh, finally a conversation that will help me understand why I cannot do specific thing with no code, and why the hell do I need code for that? Because usually, well, we'll be discussing about that, but usually with no code, there's a point where you start to notice that building a specific feature that the tool that you're using was not meant for that. And that's the point when you start with the hacky workarounds, you start with the, using more services, trying to think about how the hell do I do that now? So this topic is really interesting, at least to understand when it makes sense to assess if it's something that should be no code, when it's something that should be code, or if it's something that should be in the middle, which is something that I feel that we always miss, specifically when we will be discussing about the graph, because there's a middle ground, and that middle ground, I think that's the sweet spot that nobody's talking about, but we'll be talking about it a lot later.
It's hard to identify that middle ground. Do I go to the no
Yeah.
code side? Do I go code? If I can't code, do I hire someone to code? If you're building complex projects, we've all been there. And even Alex as a coder has been there, right? You as a
Yeah.
technical developer, you've been on the, well, should I use the no code tool, or is this like a full stack application outside of no code?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
And we'll be sharing here in the chat Alex's YouTube tutorial videos on the attributes API. This is a really nice example of no code and code together. We created attributes as a way to use very complex things on your Webflow project without any code. But no code can't cover everything. If we try to work everything into no code, it actually becomes more complex and more confusing. So we have an API for attributes that lets you add code on top of the no code infrastructure so that we don't get that really bad curve line on the effort to complexity graph. So we're sharing these YouTube videos. These are really valuable. If you have any interest in technical, if you're not a coder and you even think you may want to code, you got to watch these 2, 3 times. Very important, because understanding how this stuff works unlocks the doors to making that decision, no code or code. Okay, we're going to get a little technical today, right? We have the CTO here, and this is going to not just be a simple conversation with no code. We're going to talk about things that I may not even understand, and Alex understands. That's why we have him here. We're going to talk about real life situations. Alex, what?
I was about to say that I'm really bad at technical talk, so I I always try to explain things my own way. So I think that you'll still understand it. Well, I'll try to. I'll try to.
You know, Alex always says something like that, but he's so good at explaining the technical concepts in a simple way. Like really good. I think one of the best that I've had, that I've come across, because a lot of technical people, they explain it in technical terms, and it makes it very difficult for a non-technical person to understand. That's why you go on like a JS library docs page and you read through it and you say, what the heck did I just read? I don't understand any of this,
Yeah.
because they're
Yeah.
communicating to like-minded developers. But I really do think Alex has a good method for explaining this stuff in a more simple form. And I think that's what we're trying to get to today, breaking this stuff down so that we can all understand it regardless of your technical knowledge. And before we get too far into this, I want to give a shout out to our friends at codemeetsnocode.com. That's Aaron Kornblit and Connor Finlayson, pushing the technical boundaries of no-code tools. Aaron made me give this announcement, so Aaron, I am giving you the announcement. Codemeetsnocode.com. Check it out. We are all about pushing these boundaries. That's what this talk is all about. So it's very fitting to push these boundaries using no-code tools, adding code on top of it.
Yeah.
And the audience question of the day. We want this one to be interactive. This is not a we talk and you listen episode. We want to bring up your use cases. We want to hear your stories. Did you accidentally choose no code over code? Did you accidentally choose code over no code? Understanding these stories and sharing these stories, it's going to help you better understand. It's going to help everybody else better understand. So we're looking for that. Please tell us where you've went wrong with the tech stack, whether that's the wrong no code tools, the wrong code tools, or anything in between. Anything else to
And
add, Alex, before? Yeah.
yeah, I wanted to say that it it shouldn't necessarily be a wrong decision, because I mean every product has a journey when you're building it. It's not the same when you started and you had just an MVP, something like a very small idea, and you had in mind that idea and you know for sure that you could build it with a no-code tool. It would be Webflow or whatever other no-code tool. But that idea might be changing in the future, and the same that an idea changes, I think that it's good to change the stack that you're using. It's not like I don't feel like if you made the decision of going no code, you fucked it up for the entire life yet already. I don't feel that that's the case unless you there's a point where you knew that the tool that you were using was no longer the right one, and you still would push to use that one because you didn't want to change. Probably that's the moment where you made the bad decision, not initially when you chose it, but at the moment that you knew that you had to change and you did not. Yeah, probably the question is more like that from my perspective.
That's a really nice self-reflection thing right there. Really looking into yourself and saying,
Yeah.
am I building this project the right way? Am I continuing to build the project the right way? It's not enough anymore to just deliver the project and be done with it. You have to deliver a
Yep.
project with scalability in mind, with maintenance in mind, with handing off to a different developer or a different agency in mind. And Dennis says it right here, the more experienced I get, the more I prefer custom code to no code. Once you start to understand this and you think, oh, I can take out a whole other platform here. I don't need to add this other no code tool. because I know how to write a little bit of code here. It can become powerful for that project. Let's see, we have Penny here. I see so many folks on Twitter talking about how they've been drawn to code now that they're working with no code tools. Yes, Penny, absolutely. I'm one of those people. I don't code, but I love talking about code and hiring people at Finsweet that code because it's really efficient. It's really good when you do it the right way. And no code really helps you understand those base topics when you want to get into code. Okay, we have a question from Lucas. What's your current top 5 to 10 app stack? I think we're going to answer this one later, Lucas. Let's get into the show. We'll talk more about the apps. We're going to talk about live use cases. So stay around for that one. Okay, anything else we want to bring up here before we go in? Okay, we have Devilman agreeing. Had the same feeling after I got experience with Webflow, this using code a little bit more than no code. And Rock and Roll CEO coming in 100% with Penny. The more I learn no code, the more I want to learn the code that makes it work. So we're seeing a bit of a trend here. Everybody is saying the same thing. This episode was inspired by this article, which I'm bringing up right here. This is an article by Jason Morris called Code versus No Code. And Alex had sent this to me last week. I read it and I thought it was really interesting. I thought it was a really cool take, an interesting take, a unique take on why people may choose code versus no code. It's not necessarily making the right decision. It's all about falling in this learning curve. So we're going to bring up one of the graphs on this article. We're going to share this article link as well so you can check it out. And yeah, we're going to go through this graph. Let's bring up this graph and talk about what this is about. This is my favorite graph from the article. And it is an effort to complexity graph. And you can see we have this green line. No code is better than code right here in this green area. And here, this purple, code is better. And look at the way that these graphs, these lines move here. Code starts much higher than no code, right? You automatically have more effort in code than no code for these really low complexity projects. Think about a local business landing page or a simple web form submission that you can use Webflow and you can get this live in just a few hours. But as you continue to use these no-code tools, look how it's easy, easy, easy. And now the effort is scaling exponentially. And then we get to this point in the middle where no code continues to expand exponentially, and code is just with this really light and easy line going forward. This is where a lot of people start to fail when they get into this no code area right around here. And they're starting to now integrate with different APIs. They have 4 or 5 different applications managing the flow of data and managing the functions and the processes. And then you get to this point where you say, well, is no code the right tool here? Do I really need 5 applications putting all this information together? Or can I use code and really build something a lot more scalable moving forward? So this really inspired me. This is what created this episode today. Alex, let's hear what you have to think about this.
Yeah. Well, one key thing of the article that I think it's very interesting is that because now you're seeing the graph and it makes full sense. You're seeing that and you think, oh, right, I'm using no code. And then once the complexity takes a lot of effort, then there's code. But what the article points out is that usually a person who starts with no code is not aware of the curve of code. So you can imagine seeing this graph, but without the curve of code. So you would just see that you're starting to use a no code tool. It goes super well, but as the complexity goes up, you're starting to notice that it's getting very hard. You need other tools, as you said, or you need to start thinking about hacky workarounds to implement something. But you're still not aware of code. You don't know how to code. You don't know how complex would it be to develop the same thing with code. So the only thing that you're now thinking is, oh, this tool is crap. I cannot do what I wanted to do with this tool. So being aware of what's going on, not only with the tool, but what you could do with code, or maybe there are other tools that are a little bit more complex, but because they follow more codey, principles, something like that. Being aware of those tools and understanding what you can do with them will also always help you make better decisions, as said before.
And also understanding what the tools do from a technical perspective.
Yeah.
Understanding what Zapier is actually doing behind the no-code dashboard.
Yeah.
Understanding what Integromat's doing behind the dashboard. And I think no-code, going into Webflow, going into things like Airtable, is so easy because of how low this starts. And the article says most people are not willing to learn up to this level. Most people are comfortable right here. They're comfortable jumping into these tools and doing something with all the same effort, right? Look how straight this line is. So I'm able to make some money. I have success. I'm doing well. I'm loving it. I'm loving it. I'm loving it. I'm learning a little bit more. I'm learning a little bit more. Most people are not willing to learn and do all of these things without any progress, right? This is so much more effort, and it's not easy to learn, right? Code, you can't just jump into code and say, great, I'm now a coder. It takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of skill. So that's why people start here. It's just easier. Alex, when you learned code, how did you learn? What was your process for learning? Did you start with no code tools? Did you jump right into JavaScript?
No, I did start with no code tools. I started
Wow.
with, because I think that it's actually hard to find somebody that does not start with a no code tool nowadays, unless it's somebody who, I don't know, landed in uni with a technical degree and they were forced to learn something like that. But from a user perspective, you're not thinking, hey, I want to build a website, and you Google, I want to build a website, and the first thing that you're going to see, it's not course about HTML and JavaScript and all that stuff. You will see first Wix, WordPress, all the stuff that it's just giving you mostly all of that already pre-built for you, or a very simple tool to do it. And you're going to go that way. I mean, nobody is going to willingly say, I want to learn how to code and I never built a website. I mean, unless somebody's forcing you to do it, nobody's going to say, well, at least what I think is that nobody's going to go that way. And obviously I had the same path. I had a project. I was just a teenager and I needed to build a website. What did I do? I just created a WordPress site. I need a template because I'm not a designer. So I used a template. And then I had my first bump. Oh, I need to add a floating element on that template. And I don't know how the hell put a floating a button at the on the bottom right of that template. So I think that there's this learning, this path that it's just natural. You first need to build something. You're just going to do it the easy way, the way that you have, and then you're just going to be following that path. And I follow exactly that one. I needed to implement something that was not available. Then okay, I needed to learn a little bit of HTML and CSS. Then the platform was not the ideal one. Okay, then let me try to code a very simple website just with HTML and CSS myself. I fucked it up. And then I needed something more complex, and then I found out Webflow. It's like you go scaling and scaling. So 100% I can relate with this path.
Same here. I learned the no code tool,
Mhm.
and then I needed JavaScript in the project, so I started to look into it and I started to review it. But me, like most people, when I started to look into JavaScript, I said, not really for me. I don't really like this. I can't see myself being awesome at this. And I think a lot of people start to learn code. They're motivated to learn code, but they stop very quickly in the first
Yeah.
week, in the second week, in the third week, because when we bring this graph back up, there is no progress up until this point. Jumping up from this point up into this point is a zero progress. And what that means
Mhm.
is you're not going to have meaningful projects in this time. You're not going to make any money in this time. This is, it's just learning time. So now you say you learn no code. Where does this line start to happen? Where does this curve start to happen? I'm thinking this curve starts when we are starting to think about external data, either bringing external data into our Webflow site, moving it out of the website. How do you see this curve starting? Because a lot of people start here,
Well,
they're marketing sites, and now they're starting to get into the web app world.
but is this question specific to Webflow or to any no-code tool?
Let's keep it Webflow.
Okay. I mean, because the base idea is that the curve starts going up the moment that you need to implement something that the platform is not giving you. That's the moment that you either try to implement the same tool, the same solution with another more complex tool. Try to patch another tool to work together with the one that you're using. For example, as you said, Webflow, you need to do something when sending data. You could try to, instead of use Webflow, maybe, I don't know Bubble, but perhaps in Bubble, you can do something about that data that you cannot do with Webflow. Or you can just bring in Zapier, Integromat, or any of those tools, and now you're patching another tool that you need to learn to implement that specific feature. So I think that the moment that stuff starts to the effort it starts to increment is when you need to fill a gap. In the case of Webflow specifically, I think that you said it well. Dealing with external data, dealing with interactivity of elements, but not specific to interactions, but other things. A form, I need to add or remove fields based on what the user did, or a page, I need to, I don't know, to trigger some kind of functionality based on what the user clicked around. Things like that, that just not animations, but interactivity across the site itself. Because these are things that you cannot do with Webflow. So I see that curve going up at that moment.
And then where do we hit this? What is this center point? This is the big question. This is where you're presented with the question, should this be code or should I continue with no code?
I think that that specific point is when you're not only using tools together, but also you're having to implement hacky workarounds to make those tools work together.
Right.
Because one thing is submitting a form in Webflow and then just sending the data. Webflow already has a webhook for that. You can consume that with Zapier. Everything feels all still native, no code. You don't have any complexity around it. But now imagine that when sending that data, you also need to, I don't know, first, before submitting the form, you want that data to also, you want to add a hidden field in there. And we, based on that hidden field, when processing the data in Zapier, you want to store that data somewhere else, or maybe you want to put the user on a different marketing list, things. I don't know. I'm just coming up with this. But you probably, when you start having these more specific use cases, you're going to hit a point when you're going to see that either Webflow or Zapier or any other tool lets you do that just clicking around in the UI natively. You'll have to think about, okay, now I need to do something about it. And it feels hacky. And the next person who's going to jump to this project, I cannot tell that person, this project is using Webflow and Zapier. I need to tell that person, this project is using Webflow, Zapier, but be aware that
Mhm.
between Webflow and Zapier, there's a workaround that we implemented because we needed to deal with the data and blah, 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 blah. You know, the moment that somebody jumps in the project and doesn't know what the hell is going on because you implemented workarounds, I think that that's the point when the complexity is just scaling way more than just using code straight up.
This is so true. This is not only about us having it
Yeah.
better for us or better or yeah, not it's not about having it better for us, it's about better for anybody. And
Yeah.
you, the next person, the client, if there is a string of platforms, all different types of yeah, but this, and this happens this unique way, and this happens this unique way. This actually becomes a lot more complex and with a lot more effort than code. Because with code, you may not know code, but somebody else who knows code can jump into the project and understand what's going on. When you have 4 different no code platforms all linked together, even somebody that knows no code would need a real proper onboarding to
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
This it's you can't just open up every platform and say, "Great, I know exactly what's going on." There's no cross-platform documentation here. We have some really good comments, so I'm going to jump into these. Rohan says, "It's like learning a new language." And then Dennis comes in to say, "I think it goes way beyond that. Learning to code requires an understanding of how computers act and browsers do things. Learning the language and syntax is the final step." That's interesting. That's some deep thinking right there. I like that. We have a cool comment from Barry. "Designers with coding skills are like chefs with sharp knives and full equipments in the kitchen." Nice. Yeah. If you can design, you can Webflow develop, and you have some technical knowledge, yeah,
You gotta
you're a great
rock.
chef. You're gonna make some
Yeah.
good food. Tinette says, "Do you think when Webflow releases logic, some of this will be taken care of natively? Well, I think some things can be taken natively, of course. I don't know exactly what logic will release as, but I do know it's probably going to prevent or it's not going to make you use Zapier all the time, right? I think Zapier, if you rely on Zapier, I think that logic is going to replace some of those instances. Not all of the instances, but we saw it at No Code Conf last year that you could send things into the CMS. So if you've ever done
Mhm.
that in Zapier, I would like to think that logic can completely erase that. And this lowers that learning curve. It lowers that complexity line because it's all on the same platform. That makes it so much more simple. Alex?
Actually, I was about to say it increases the learning curve in Webflow because before you had two learning curves: the learning curve of Webflow and the learning curve of Zapier. Now the Webflow learning curve it's bigger because you actually need to learn something new in Webflow. But the big picture learning curve, I think that it eases a little bit because now you're not jumping between two platforms. So that's
Yeah,
I feel that there's a difference there.
totally. I
Yeah.
totally agree with that. The more platforms you have, the more dependencies you have. These are dependencies. I think the more difficult it is to maintain and scale and hand off. We'll
Hmm.
tell some stories, some mini horror stories about how too many platforms together really wasn't the right choice for a project. From Daniel, for me, the point was when I had to add a Hungarian billing app to a project, but it had no Zapier integration. I ended up asking a dev to help me out with APIs, still not confident with that. So, Daniel, I need a follow up answer here. Was this the right choice? Was this application built? Did the code do what it was supposed to do to get you that Hungarian billing app to work? Uh, from Devilman, I believe people would be more interested in learning JavaScript by learning how to make an animation or something else that interests them before moving on to boring, hard parts of front end development. Yeah, if animations interest you, start with animations.
Yeah.
If form stuff, right? If you love form submissions, if you love getting a user from a website to another path, start with forms. Uh, I love the idea of learning things when I need them in real life. If I need to integrate a
Mhm.
countdown timer, that's when I'm going to learn how to build a countdown timer with JavaScript. I'm not going to learn how to build it if I have no practical use for it. So, yeah, start with what you love. Alex, you have anything to share for that?
Well, I just was nodding my head because I
Yeah,
100%
it's
agree.
true.
Because
Well,
when you
what
need,
did you start to
go
learn?
ahead.
How did you start to learn?
I cannot remember actually. I mean, I know for sure that it was things like that, like something that I wanted to implement on a website, and then I just did it, and then I just went scaling from there. But I couldn't tell right now what was the specific feature that I wanted to implement. I mean, and learn, because one thing is learning a specific thing, and but another thing is learning an entire language. Because if you just need to build a timer, it does not matter at all how you do it. If you just do some spaghetti code for that, it's just going to still be something that works. It's just a timer. It's just a few lines of code. Nothing will explode with that code. But you implementing features like that will help you learn a specific skill or a specific, I don't know, browser API, something that you want to learn from with JavaScript. But the moment that you need to increase the complexity of what you're building, that will lead you to also want to learn something more complex, like how do I organize my code in the code base. What's the best practice for not building this huge block of code and instead doing something that's smarter, that it's more performant. I don't know. It's not only the concept about developing features, but also improving those features later on when you need to, just when you need to. So I mean, I said before, it's just a natural path that you take.
Comment from Nicola. The same as with no code. It's not easy to manage and update many dependencies. Of course. So we just talked about it's not easy to update to have a lot of no code dependencies. Sure, the same is very true with code. If you have a lot of dependencies in your code, it could cause some issues. It could make
Mhm.
it more difficult to manage moving forward. Alex, I'm going to have you answer this, but first I want to make a comment of a lot of times you can cut out an entire no code application with a single JavaScript file, with a
Mhm.
single JavaScript snippet. And this, I don't see this as growing dependencies. I see more dependencies when you're building full web applications, full stack type things. But Alex, I want to hear your opinion on this. Is there a time where the code dependencies actually become too much and it's not worth it to building code? And I'll bring this graph back up to talk about where somebody may be coding over here on this green line, the green section.
I don't think that there's an issue with dependencies as long as you do the right process for managing them. Nowadays, I mean, because every time that there's some pain point in the workflow that we follow by developing something, when building something, we want to solve it. So, I mean, since a lot of years, there has been a lot of improvements in how you manage dependencies in code, specifically because of that. Now you have automated bots that update the dependencies for you, that test your code to see if something broke when you updated something. That you can see exactly, you can put rules about updating stuff or what, there are a lot of processes that help you managing dependencies, but obviously the complexity of those processes, it's not necessarily low because you need to understand how they work. Um, so I think I believe that this is a balance between what easy and what's efficient, but at the same time, the complexity of both things I'm explaining super bad, but I feel that I'm making the point maybe on that.
Yeah, it's the reason why people may not understand what the right choice is because this purple is so high.
Hmm.
Yeah, let's go through some comments here.
There was
Dennis,
there was a
yes.
comment from maybe you still haven't reached it by Penny that said, I think that Webflow makes the journey from no code to code more inevitable than other tools. I wanted to mention something about that, but let me first turn on my fan because I'm heating right now. Yeah,
So
I'm
Penny
back.
says, I see so many
Yeah,
folks on Twitter talking about is it this one?
no, another one.
Oh, okay, I have a
Yeah, I
wrong one
think
here.
it's previous to that or not. I think that Webflow makes the journey from no code to code more inevitable. She sent it at minute 28. Maybe you can find it like that.
Okay, Penny, we're looking for you here. Yeah,
Do you
I
find
don't
it?
see it.
No?
No. Okay, but
Okay,
talk about
that's
it.
fine. Yeah, that's fine. Because one of the things that I wanted to share my opinion is when, so you have a no-code tool, and that no-code tool offers you specific feature. Something, I don't know, let's start with something simple. And then that no-code tool, when it grows in complexity, wants to allow the user to build something more complex. I think that it will always naturally tend to follow coding principles. And the reason for that is because there's nothing more powerful than code. The tool itself, it's built with code. You cannot build something more complex than the code itself. So when you need full freedom to do something, you will have to tend to, to get close to the coding principles itself that allow the tool to work. And I feel that Webflow itself, it's one great example for that. Webflow wanted to give full design freedom with HTML and CSS. If they went the road with other tools like Wix, Squarespace, Elementor, things like that, all those tools, they have like an abstraction on top of what's going on. So they cannot they cannot get close to what you can do with Webflow, specifically because Webflow, it's just following the HTML and CSS principles, which means that when you're following, if you could put the graph of the no-code tools there, when you start following this path of becoming complex and trying to learn a tool that's more complex and allows you to do more things, without knowing it, you will be slowly understanding more concepts about how the tool itself it's working underneath, because you're trying to build something complex with it. And as said, the more complex it is, the more that it will tend to resemble what the coding principles that power it. So I think it's a natural step that when learning that, it will be helpful for you. It will be more easy to you to just learn code. And I think that everyone here in the chat could say that. If you know Webflow, all the ins and outs, you know how all the elements, how the styling principles, everything works, I'm 100% sure that I'm going to present with you to you an HTML and CSS project, and you will be able to understand it way better than somebody who doesn't know Webflow, who just built a website with Wix. So this gap between code and no code, it's actually closing the more complex the no code tools become. So, perhaps there would be another line there in the graph that would show kind of the process merging both and becoming local, what's called. But yeah, that was my thought about what Penny said of learning.
That's a really nice way to put it, that as something becomes more as the platform gives you more power to do things with code, you start to understand these principles more. So that made me think, once you're over here, once you're starting this path up of more effort, more complexity, that's when you can make the jump to over here and understand what this code line is.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Is that clear?
Yeah, the jump is easier. It's not like
Yeah.
jumping from the beginning where you made the jump directly to code and it was hell of a
Hmm.
ride. But
Hmm.
instead, you have this kind of like flux switch that it just goes gracefully between something that you kind of already understand how it works and
Hmm.
something that by knowing how that works, you just you already have the idea and it's easy for you to catch up. Um,
Yep. Let's bring up
yep,
a comment here from Nicola. Totally agree with this. The best is a hybrid solution, code plus no code.
yep,
Now, I want to make it very clear that this graph does not mean the entire project should be code or the entire project should be no code. That maybe you have Webflow as a base and you're approaching some more serious, difficult types of features. You can put code on top of that. We're not just this is the hybrid model totally makes sense and it works with this graph.
yep.
Yeah. Okay, let's bring up some more comments here. We had a really good one from Magdalena. Let me find this one. Alex, is it
Oh,
possible to reach your level of JavaScript by just learning it on your own?
on your
Well,
own, you mean like no mentor, no going to school?
yeah,
I
yeah,
le-
learning
I
it on
learned
your own, I think. Yeah,
I learned on my own.
yeah. So it's possible. You're the
Yeah,
proof, the living, breathing proof.
yeah.
Alex just started learning JavaScript. What 2 years ago? 3 years ago?
We probably four already.
Okay, four.
I've been almost 2 years in Finsweet already.
Oh,
So,
okay. Wow.
4 years ago, I mean, I knew a little bit of code because I had a mechanical engineering. So in my degree, I kind of learned some random stuff that I didn't want to learn because I was not interested in it. But I mean, I could say that 100% everything that I know it's just because I wanted to learn it and I found the resources and I just learned it. Perhaps I
Hmm.
had it a little bit easier because I knew a little bit of code from my degree, but I don't think that makes a difference at all. It's just motivation and and the will of wanting to learn something like we said before. It's just more
Yep.
powerful than anything that you can learn um, somewhere else.
And we'll bring up from Tanet. Can you give an example of a particular project you worked on where no code was the best choice to do X? Let's get into some examples here. We have a list of examples, we have some stories to tell, but I will say it's usually the opposite, where we start with no code because we're in Webflow. We're Webflow leaders, so people come to us with no code projects. And then as we're building it, we realize, ooh, it probably should have been code. Alex, do you have any examples of this other way that Tanet's
Yeah,
asking?
yeah. I mean, but just asking for this specific question, when there's something that a tool already lets you do it, just do it with that tool. You don't need to think about, hey, I prefer to do it with coding because it's cooler. If you have a no code tool that just with 2 clicks, it's just going to do the work for you, there's no reason why you should spend extra efforts to build that specific thing. So I think that this makes sense what you're saying, Joe, that actually the most stories are the other way around. When you start with no code and then you realize that you wanted to go, that it was preferable to go with code. I can share a
Oh,
story, but
actually, Tanet, let me say Tanet actually meant the opposite, which we have plenty of stories on. A project where code was the best choice to do X.
yeah, yeah, that's
Okay.
no code or no code.
Yeah,
She's
Tanet
saying no
Tanet
code.
switched the words
Okay.
here. So Tanet followed up with another comment
Oh,
that
okay, okay, okay,
yeah,
okay.
she
Got it.
actually meant that where was code better? And I want to comment on your 2 clicks comment. It's very rare that you're going to find a no code tool that really lets you do something with 2 clicks. Like maybe, you're sending simple web form from Webflow to HubSpot. That's fairly simple. Few clicks, you can get it working. But the problem is when you then need to add this dynamic field, and this field
But
is also going to send to Airtable and change the status of something.
but maybe you don't need it. That's the
Okay.
point.
Yeah. Nice.
If you know that you won't need it, then it makes perfect sense. You just make those 2 clicks. You're alive. You have a website with a form, and you can just submit it to Airtable. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
Um, I think that knowing beforehand what you will need, it's very powerful, but not needed. I said when I said at the beginning of the stream that there's always a transition. There's always a moment that you can change that's valid. But
Mhm.
anyways, going to stories, I can share a story of a waffle project that it seemed like it would be just 2 clicks, as said. But then we realized that the more complex and more complex was becoming, it was just a hell to maintain, a hell to just finish all those features. So I had a client a few years ago, right when I was starting Webflow, actually. Um, and that client, they wanted to build an e-commerce store. So first, we wanted to build it in Webflow, and we decided, okay, e-commerce, let's go with native Webflow e-commerce. So that was one step. But then the client was like, hey, but actually here in Webflow we don't have user accounts. You don't have that dashboard with you can see all the orders and all this stuff. Okay, then we need to think about something else. Then we decided to add Snipcart. Snipcart is it's a cool tool that you can add on top of any static page, and that allows you to have e-commerce. So in that case, that was great. We were able to implement Snipcart. First workaround, we needed to have a solution with Webflow CMS where we could put the products on the page and bind them to Snipcart using an embed because you needed the code. So that was the first step where, okay, we have a complexity that somebody that jumps in this project, I will have to explain that person. Hey, be aware that this collection in Webflow, it's having a hidden embed that you don't see it, but that's actually there with the code. Please don't remove that because it's going to break the site. One complexity. Then the client needed to have more metadata with the items, and they needed a way to manage it because they had a big list of items. They had a lot of things that they needed to organize. Some items needed to be live, some items didn't need to be live based on certain parameters. So okay, we decided let's put Airtable on here. Let's put Airtable in here, and because the products were also managed with Snipcart, Snipcart had an API, and that API, with another workaround, we could use Zapier to synchronize Airtable with Snipcart. So we had another complexity level there that I wouldn't explain to somebody. But then the
Oh
client
no.
then wanted, when adding the product to the cart, some products were customizable. Customizable, is that the word? That you could upload an image, and that image would be printed on the product. And that feature was not available either in Webflow, in Snipcart, anything. So again, another thing, we had to find a solution for uploading images, but at the same time, I had to do some custom coding because I wanted to upload the image, but send the image URL to the order before making the purchase. And when making the purchase, I also needed to send that URL to Airtable because from Airtable, the client was managing all the printing of the products before shipping them. Again, another complexity level. And well, and then also everything was managed from Webflow CMS. So there were a lot of hidden collections with stuff on the page that you needed to have to manage. And something that started with just oh yeah, cool, let's build a Webflow e-commerce site, ended up being this whole bunch of products with connections that you need to be aware of. You need to know custom code to understand how they were built. And if somebody was jumping in the project in Webflow, they needed to know that, hey, this element, please don't hide it, because this element when the page is loading, it shows a pop-up with an offer from Snipcart, or this element, hey, please don't remove it because it's holding an actual metadata, something for Snipcart, and that balance of things that was very helpful at the beginning. Then you think I could just have coded everything from scratch, and I would be more everything would be more maintainable and scalable. But it's just a natural path. And I think it's
Yeah.
fine.
And it helps so much when you have the project specs ready in front of you. When you
Yeah.
have the entire specification ready to go. But unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't happen like that. And it's, oh yeah, and this. And we forgot this limitation here. And we forgot this limitation here. I kept hearing you say the word hacky workaround.
Yeah.
Yeah, hacky and workaround. These are two words that tell you that you're starting to go up this curve, right? When I hear hacky and workaround, I'm thinking growing up this curve, and now I'm starting to access this area of the curve. You do too much of that, now you pass the line of where code probably makes more sense over here. So I will also share a story that I just thought of as you were telling yours.
Okay.
We were building a great website for a really great company. Everything went so well in this project. We had our top people working on it. It had design, it had development, everything was perfect. And then at the end, we had this fairly complex Marketo setup. And the client didn't really want a hosted JavaScript file. They wanted to limit JavaScript because they wanted their marketers to manage this. They're Zapier users, so we went into Zapier. This seems very easy, right? Marketo form, going into Zapier, and it's going to go into Marketo. There were hidden fields, there was custom tracking, and there was a lot of other types of fields that had to go from Webflow into Marketo. Marketo was not properly reading any of the Munchkin tracking data. If you've worked with Marketo, you know about the Munchkin, and there's a whole bunch of different things you can push through that to track the user through the site. So we set it up and it worked. But when we went to go and duplicate it in Webflow, someone had to go in and reconfigure a whole new instance of that in Zapier. So as the client was saying, oh, and we want a form to do this here, and we want a form to do this here, we want a form to do this here, it would take about 20 minutes to actually copy a form in Webflow, paste it in the new location, and then go into Zapier and duplicate that Zap for the new form with the new form fields, with the new form ID, right? Webflow changes that form ID when you have two forms on a page. We ran into issue and issue and issue. And by the end of it, both the client and Finsweet said Zapier was not the right choice here. And it was kind of stressful. For something that we did because we thought it would be easier turned into something highly stressful and something that required a lot of knowledge to do. Only 2 people on our team were qualified enough to use Zapier like this. It was a very complex instance of Zapier in this Marketo setup. So we actually had more people on our team that could manage the code side of it if it was in code than the Zapier side of it because it required that next level knowledge in the no code setup. And it had the same thing that Alex explained. Don't do this. When you copy a form, make sure you do this. When you have 2 forms on a page, make sure that you update the ID and that none of the fields have matching field names. So you have to actually put a 2 after every field name, including the hidden fields, including some of the JavaScript. It was a mess, and it should have been easy. So that's my story. Man, just talking about it, I'm like worked up. I'm passionately angry about it.
But because I'm getting the feels that after these stories, it feels like, man, we should not be using no code tools. I'm feeling like we're telling this to people, but actually, I think that no code tools, because there are so many use cases where you you end up making a workaround, a hacky workaround. No code tools will slowly be allowing you to do something without that workaround. And the way that you can do that is turning that no code tool to low code tool. Because sometimes you want to interact with some part of that no code tool to be able to integrate whatever else you're trying to do. If that no code tool is not giving you any developer resources, any way of hooking into the application, any way of easily doing specific action without having to think of a hacky workaround, that's a problem. So I think that naturally, no code tools will be slowly understanding that not only simple use cases exist, there are these complex use cases that most of the times they end up being a mess. But there's a way of solving that by just allowing better integration with their platform, allowing a specific feature that developers will be it will be very helpful for developers to use it when trying to think of workaround. So I think that no code it's going to see a lot of this evolution in the next following years.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Let's bring up some nice comments. Shout out to Jeremy. Thank you so much. Joe is my gateway with CMS library to push further into JavaScript. You know, Jeremy, me too. Working on CMS library and planning out that platform helped me better understand JavaScript. I was giving the direction and some of the logic to the developer, but I was much lower in my JavaScript journey at that point. But that project really helped me to better think about, okay, this is how JavaScript works. This is what we're able to do for people, giving them the options to turn on and off different features. And of course, that has changed a lot since Alex got here. So now instead of the CMS library writing code and changing those options in the code, we can now change those options with attributes. So a whole new world. Dennis, Joe, and Alex are a great combination. Thank you so much. By the way, Alex, do you know that you are a true inspiration for many? Do you know this?
Well, I know it now. Thanks. Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah, and if you weren't here for the beginning of the episode, definitely check out Alex's tutorials. We're going to share these links in the comments again. If you are thinking about code, if you are motivated at all by code or low code or adding a single script to your no-code project, you got to check out Alex's tutorials. They're really good beginner-level tutorials that go through the steps and actually give you a final product using Attributes API. So definitely check that out. Really valuable.
More videos will come actually also.
Yeah.
Because those videos are very specific for a solution, but yeah, more things we'll be sharing.
Let's bring up Jeremy's comment here. I find Make Integromat a good bridge to learning code API principles. The next step is to be able to script without it. Alex, what do you think about this one?
I think it's a good bridge. Oh, well, it's the same thing that we said before. And Integromat sometimes remembers me the same that Webflow does with HTML and CSS. They do it with their platform. I don't know how it works super well. I think I froze. I don't exactly know how the platform works. I kind of seen some things, but I believe that there are some more complex features that you can implement, like adding filters to a specific data or sending that data, splitting different paths and trying to implement conditional logic, things like that, right? And all of that is based on what you can do with code, as I said before. So I think it's in Integromat as Webflow is following the same natural path of just getting closer and closer to what you can do with code, just in a visual way, but the concept is the same. The mentality, the principles behind it are the same. And the moment that you want to switch and code that same stuff, you'll think, oh, this moment here, I have a conditional path. I just need an if else. And probably Integromat has something like an if else also. Or, hey, here, I need to filter some data. I just need to think about the same mental model that I had when inside Integromat I was picking the data and was implementing a condition for filtering that out. It's just going to help you a lot when making the jump to code if you do it eventually.
And that's a path that a lot of no coders are going to take. A lot of no coders are going to get to that next level by using these types of tools.
Yeah.
Totally. Jeremy, great comment. We're coming up at the hour, so we are going to start to close this out. Here we've shared Alex's 2 YouTube videos. Make sure you look at those. And we have the great testimonial here by Jeremy. Thank you, Jeremy. If you like this content, if you're looking for more technical chats like this kind of open, we're just talking about code and no code and technical stuff, like this video, let us know. If you don't and you prefer the less technical side, then I guess we won't invite Alex back to the show. I'm kidding. Alex will be back here. We're going to have a lot more guests. We have a lot more planned. And we will be back next Tuesday. So we still have our normal streaming days, Tuesday and Thursday at 12 Eastern. And that's it. I think we are ready to end this stream. Alex, do you have any final things to say to the crowd here?
No? Well, thank you for being here. I'm really happy to be here, for real.
Good. Great. Thank you so much. And we will be back next week with more. See you soon and have a great weekend.
Bye.